Good evening. Welcome to a Big River Training Team Endurance Nutrition presentation. My name is Mike Flynn. I'm Big River's Program Director. And joining us tonight is Amanda Wagner. Amanda is passionate about evidence-based nutrition and fitness. She's a former high school science teacher with a master's in education and science education who changed careers to become a registered dietitian nutritionist in 2022. Amanda is an avid runner and former Division I cross country and track athlete who's enthusiastic about and fueled by a vegan diet. Amanda is the owner and lead dietitian of her own private practice, Amanda Wagner Nutrition. Amanda became a USCA certified running coach in 2023 and works as a running coach for distances up to the full marathon. As a registered dietitian nutritionist, Amanda finds it rewarding to share her love of nutrition, fitness, and plant-forward eating with others and help them reach their own wellness goals. You are also welcome to work with Amanda if you aren't plant-based. She'll never pressure you to go plant-based. At this point, I'm going to turn things over to Amanda to begin her presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. What a lovely introduction. I am going to become the host and share the screen so you can all see my presentation. All right, so don't be intimidated if you see the slide number. It's actually not that long. All of you submitted so many awesome questions for this presentation that I'm actually not addressing quite all of them, but I'm getting to the common themes. The reason that I'm saying this is because some of the questions submitted, I would not be able to answer unless I did a comprehensive assessment of you in a one-on-one session. Some of them were a little too something you would need to do with a dietitian. One-on-one versus in this big group. But I am pretty certain that all of you will have some takeaways from the questions covered, and I will give additional time at the end of the session to ask more questions or to clarify things that are on your mind based on the topics covered. So with that being said, this is our agenda. So the introduction already happened. Then we're going to talk about the role of carbohydrates and talk a little bit more performance plates. This was a common question I received. I introduced this in the newsletter you all hopefully received. Then I'm going to talk about training for half and full marathons and should you pursue weight loss. I'm going to talk about what to eat the night before and the day of your long runs. And there will be time for live question and answer. And there is a surprise as well if you all stay to the end. And for the people we're recording, don't worry, you all will get a part of the surprise. It will make sense at the end. With that being said, if a question arises, feel free to drop it in the chat, but please wait until the end to ask it, just for the sake of the presentation and monitoring the chat versus talking on these topics. During a live Q&A time, you can ask your question either by going on camera if you feel comfortable, or you can just drop it in the chat. But let's get started, everyone. And so we're first talking about carbohydrate intake in training. When you're training for races, your body's preferred fuel source is coming from carbohydrates. The other macronutrients that exist, fat and protein, have their place. And then I also encourage people to have colors, also known as fruits and vegetables, but not as high in carbohydrates. Carbohydrates will be your star, and we will talk more about what carbohydrates actually are soon. So did all of you here know that your brain alone needs 130 grams of carbohydrates just to function optimally throughout the day? This includes when you're sleeping. This is the bare minimum just to survive. This doesn't even include working out, chasing after your kids, going to work, commuting, whatever it is. 130 grams. Because all of you are training for a half or full right now, or maybe a 5K, I just know that all of you are runners. Your needs are going to be much higher than this 130 grams of carbs per day. Carbohydrate intake for endurance athletes actually should be about 8 to 12 grams per kilogram of body weight spread out throughout the day. I know this is a really wide range, but your specific intake depends on how long and how often you are training, your training intensity. So are you doing mainly easy runs, building your base, or have you started throwing in some speed work? What are your daily energy needs? Are you, 5'2" like I am on the petite side? Are you really, really tall like my husband? He's 6'2". Our needs are very different because of our genders and our size. We both run, but even still, we don't have the same needs. And then how your body responds to carbohydrates. Everyone's body is a little bit different. You may want to work with a sports dietitian to determine your individual needs if you are confused. But by the end of this webinar, I'm hoping that you have some clarity around the amount of carbohydrates you may need. So I guess, lied in a sense. I do have a few interactive portions, so you all are welcome to talk or use the chat for these. I just want to reserve the major question and answer time to the end. So when you hear the word carbohydrate, what do those of you listening think of? You can just come off camera or even just unmute yourself and share words that you think of when you hear the word carbohydrate.
Bread.
Yes, bread. Awesome. Some things in
Yeah.
the I missed that.
Oh, that was me, Amanda. A pasta. I was just gonna say pasta, oatmeal.
Pasta, oatmeal. Yes, excellent. See something in the chat. If I open this, it won't be private. So I just want you all to know what you put in the chat may appear on the recording. So pastas, grains, breads. Anything else that comes to mind?
Sugar.
Sugar. Good one. All right. Anything else? All right, we'll move on. There are a couple of moments where I might ask all of you to participate a little bit. It's the teacher in me throwing that in. So here are some examples of carbohydrates that runners should eat. So first and foremost, carbohydrates encompass a few different types of food. This image here really shows them. There are a lot of the grains and breads, sugars, things that some of you have shared. But there are also a few foods that weren't shared. Things like lentils and beans also contain carbohydrates. Vegetables, although in much lower amounts. Same with fruits. Rice cakes, gluten-free grains like quinoa, popcorn. So it's not just bread. It's not just sugar. Sugar is definitely a main source of quick carbohydrates. But as a runner, we want your foundation to be what is known as whole grains. Whole grains tend to have fibers, so they're more filling, they have more staying power, they don't spike your blood sugar as quickly. There is a place for fast carbohydrates or straight sugar, things like dried fruit, candies, cakes, sports gels, sports drinks. Those would be right before you're going on a run or during your run. I also forgot to mention starchy vegetables kind of get their own special category because they have way more carbohydrates than your more water-based vegetable like broccoli, cucumber, things like that. When you are about to train, you do want to focus more on those lower fiber carbohydrates, the ones that are a bit higher in sugar. This would be the time to have your gels, your candy, dried fruits, sports drinks, pastries, a Pop-Tart. So there is a place for those. They're not off limits. It's just about knowing the timing of when to have which carbohydrate. But some of the low fiber carbohydrates are what has given carbs a bad rap for many people. So if carbohydrates are so good for runners, why do I feel better when I cut them out? I'm not saying that all of you here feel that way, but that is a question I received from a few different people. And here is some reasons why that might be the case for you. So first and foremost, you might feel better after cutting out carbohydrates because you were primarily eating fast food, low nutrition carbohydrates. Maybe you were skipping meals. Maybe you were only eating them at the end of the day versus if you were having those whole grains, those vegetables, those fruits, those beans, those legumes. That could be one reason why when you cut them out initially, you felt better because you improved the quality of your diet. So the type of carbohydrate has a huge impact on how you feel. Another reason I see in my practice as a dietitian is people that feel better when they've cut out carbohydrates. It's because they were previously experiencing food binges, typically around carbohydrate based foods. And maybe they were turning to things like candy and pastries, things like that. Usually, when you're experiencing food binges, it's because you're under fueling during the day. And the problem is not carbohydrate foods themselves, but rather that you were letting yourself get too hungry. So, typically, consistent eating, usually, this is 3 meals and 1 to 3 or more snacks per day can help with binging. And as runners, all of you need to have at least 3 meals and a few snacks per day. That's kind of the minimum when you're training for half and full marathons. Another reason I've seen, this one is rarer, but it does happen, is sometimes people have a food sensitivity, like they're sensitive to gluten, not necessarily celiac disease. With celiac disease, you cannot have gluten. You have to go gluten-free. But there is a small subset of the population that is a little more sensitive to gluten. So focusing on fruits, beans, legumes, gluten-free carbohydrates that are also whole grains, that might make you feel better when you reintroduce the carbohydrates into your diet. So if you are someone that thinks it might be gluten or the types of carbohydrates you're eating and you're really not sure and you're just having to cut things out, this is another opportunity where you might want to focus with a sports dietitian and work with them one-on-one to understand the changes you want to make and how it might make you feel. The final reason people may feel better when they cut carbohydrates out has to do with food pairing. So if you're just eating a bagel on its own, which is really appropriate right before a run, you may not be full as long. And again, it's really appropriate right before a run, but if it's in the middle of the day, maybe you want a sandwich, I would encourage you to pair it with a protein or fat source or both. So maybe that means having some nut or seed butter or having some deli meat or tofu or chickpea salad on your bread, but just having something that has a little more staying power so that food pairing can make you feel better and more energized. So sometimes that's why people feel better when they cut out carbs because they weren't pairing the food with something more filling. So again, you could have like an apple with nut or seed butter or a cheese stick. You could put something filling on your bagel. Like we just really want to pair our carbohydrates unless it's right before a run. Then that's a time just to have carbohydrates on their own. So now we're getting into peak weeks in carbohydrates. So as your training increases, so should the amount of carbohydrates you consume at each meal and snack. So it's kind of like a graph. We're going up, up, up. And that's where all of us are right now because we're getting closer and closer to your goal races. A lot of you are running cowbell. A few of you may be running Go St. Louis. Maybe a few other races. Shout out to Chicago. That's where I'm based. Indy Monumental. NYC, maybe even CIM, although it might be a bit early to start training for that one. But where I'm going with this is as you get closer and closer to your peak weeks, you want to make sure 1/3 to 1/2 of your meals and snacks contain carbohydrates. And I will show all of you what this looks like visually in a little bit later in this presentation. If you are feeling tired all week and after every run, especially your long runs, you may be underfueling, especially when we think about carbohydrates. I want to emphasize there are many other causes to tiredness. There could also, be your iron levels or your B12 levels, the amount of sleep at night, how your training is progressing. But carbohydrates is something to consider. So I want all of you to take a gut check now. Where is your carbohydrate intake now? Does it need improvement? Have you been kind of afraid to take in carbohydrates because you were told that they were fattening or bad for you or not a good idea? I just want all of you to think about that throughout the rest of this presentation. So if you're unsure how your meals or snacks should look throughout this training cycle when we think of carbohydrates or any of the other components, I'm going to walk through it for all of you visually and with words. We're going to talk about performance plates, which I introduced in the blog post and newsletter. A performance plate is a visual representation of how to divide your plate. This, in some cases, is more of a metaphorical plate. It's not literally that you have to have this plate every time you have a meal and a snack, but it's how you can think about having carbohydrate foods, protein foods, and colorful foods, also known as your fruits and vegetables. You also should include a small source of healthy fats, such as cooking vegetables in olive oil, using some salad dressing, maybe some nuts or seeds. And then at least 2 of the 3 meals, I want you all to think about as runners having either a source of dairy, or if you are vegan, like myself, a non-dairy source of calcium. So pea milk, soy milk, a vegan yogurt if you eat dairy, regular milk, cheese. Leafy greens have some calcium, but we do also want to have that calcium component at most of our meals as well. As a note, plant-based protein is not as bioavailable, so vegan athletes and vegetarian athletes need to eat about 10% more protein per meal than their meat-eating peers. So that's just something to keep in mind and something I commonly work with when I work with plant-based athletes. And I'm a plant-based athlete myself, so I'm pretty versed in, having just a little more protein than my omnivore counterparts. What is also really nice about plant-based protein sources is they contribute to your overall carbohydrate intake as well. If you think about things like lentils and beans, and that can be really advantageous during your peak training weeks. Most of your training cycle should be performance plate 2 and 3. We're going to go over 1 through 3 in the next slides. So performance plate 1. This is what your plate should look like during the off season. This is when you're running like 15 miles per week or less, you're cross training. This would equate to about 4 to 5 hours of light activity weekly or less. You could also have a type 1 plate at your meals and snacks on rest days, unless it's during really heavy training weeks, which we'll talk about what your rest day performance plate might look like for those. This is also the performance plate recommended for weight loss when appropriate, but more on this later. Plate 2 is where you should be if you're running about 15 to 40 miles per week and training up to 8 hours a week, including lifting and cross training. Plate 3 is where you should be if you're running 40 miles per week or more, or the hours of training is 8 hours or more. So that's the breakdown just on where you should be. So think about your training now and how many hours you've been running and lifting. I would presume at this point, most of you are at plate 2 and plate 3. On a rest day during peak training weeks, 40 miles per week or more, or the 8 hours, you want to make sure your plate still looks like plate 2 or 3, even on a rest day, because you need to keep your carbohydrate intake up to prime yourself for the rest of your training week. So let's look at these performance plates. So this is your off-season weight loss, easy weeks performance plate. So half of your plate should be filled with color, fruits and vegetables, fiber, antioxidants. A fourth of it should be filled with those carbohydrate-rich foods, potatoes, rice, oatmeal, bread, things like that. And then a fourth of it should be filled with protein-rich foods, chicken, tofu, beans, things like that. You also want to have a small amount of fat because this fat source will help you absorb vitamins A and D from your food and help you feel full. It's also really important for the production of hormones, which is, things like estrogen and testosterone, but also has to do with things like cortisol, things like your appetite hormones like ghrelin. I'm not going to nerd out about all the hormones. I just want all of you to know you do need to have some fat in your diet, even on Performance Plate 1. Just because I have the resources, I also have included a completely plant-based performance plate as well, just visually, adding a few more things, seitan, trail mix, lentil, tempeh, tofu, beans, peas are a good source of protein. They also are a color. And I did that for all the performance plates. We have an omnivore and a plant-based one. So now we're at the in-season performance plate. This is probably where most of you are at now if you are more than 4 hours of training per week, but less than 8. So a third carbohydrates, a third color, and a third protein. And then utilizing fat, maybe putting salad dressing or sprinkling hemp seeds on your dish, some way where you're still getting a source of fat. Maybe you're sauteing your vegetables in some olive oil. So this is the plant-based counterpart as well. Now peak weeks. This is where you'll be when you get even closer to race week. Some of you might be here now if you are a really high mileage runner, if you are a high volume runner, and by volume I mean many hours on your feet. You may be at Performance Plate 3. And look at this, half of your plate should be carbohydrate. Only about a fourth should be color and a fourth should be protein. And if you're plant-based, you'll get a little additional carbohydrates if you decide to include beans. This is a protein and a carbohydrate source. So we have our plant-based one as well here. I gave the omnivore plates to all of you on that blog post, but if any of you want the plant-based specifically, let me know and I can get that out to everyone. I do also have the plant-based ones published on my website for reference as well. So this is going to ask for some sort of participation for anyone that is willing. So what is your go-to performance plate and what phase of training are you in? Just by way of example, I'm in my base training phase right now. I've been averaging, in around 30 to like higher 30 miles per week. So I've been rocking Performance Plate 2 because my total time on my feet has not surpassed that 8-hour mark for me. And my go-to performance plate is just what's in the picture. I love making black bean tacos. Tortilla is the carb, some black beans for protein, some avocado for healthy fats, and then some corn, tomatoes, peppers for color. And then I also like to throw in potatoes to give me an extra carbohydrate boost. But if anyone wants to share what phase of training they're in and a go-to performance plate, feel free either in the chat or out loud. I need a sip of water. And if not, totally cool. We can move on. All right, next question. So training for half and full marathons and weight loss. So as you can see, I honestly do not recommend these to happen at the same time. So let's talk about that more. I also want to be clear, this is a very general recommendation, and there are certainly exceptions to this, and we can talk more if people have questions at the end. But typically performance goals, so finishing a half or full marathon, running a personal best time, they're at odds with weight loss. And that's because a performance goal requires adequate energy. This means calories, and weight loss requires calorie restriction. And so if you're participating in calorie restriction, you may not be able to have the energy to train for your race or run your best time. So they are unfortunately at odds with each other for most people. Training for a half or full and cutting calories may lead to poor recovery. You may have more muscle soreness, trouble sleeping. You may lose your muscle mass. You may be fatigued throughout the day. These are just a few of the consequences that might happen if you're restricting your calories while you're training for a half or full marathon. Another thing that's important to note is the stress of cutting calories while marathon training can actually lead to further weight gain, because your body is going to want to hold on to this weight because it's like, oh my gosh, what's happening? I need energy and not enough energy is coming in. It's actually really complicated physiologically. Another reason it can be hard to pursue weight loss while training is your body will often hold on to a little bit of extra weight while training, at least initially, because your body will store extra water with glycogen. So when you're eating a higher carbohydrate diet, this isn't true weight gain, but it can make the scale go up because you're holding more water. And as your body gets used to your training and an increased carbohydrate intake, this can kind of go away. I also find that many of the athletes I work with that are trying to lose weight during a training cycle are restricting their calories during the day, and then at night they're so hungry that they end up binging, and they just kind of fall in this like binge restrict cycle that just isn't really lending itself to performance. So these are just some of the reasons why I don't really recommend trying to lose weight intentionally while training for a half or a full. So when should you pursue weight loss then? I recommend pursuing it in the off season or the very beginning of your training cycle before the miles go up. You're able to weather calorie restriction at this time a little easier without upping your risk of injury. So for many of you, we're in the Midwest now. November, December, unless you're running the New York Marathon or CIM, or January or February, if you aren't training for Boston or a really early spring race, this might be a good time to really focus on weight loss if that does happen to be one of your goals. Depending on your activity levels in the off season, you may not need as many carbohydrates or overall calories, but most people still need to eat 1,800 calories or more. 1,200 calories is hardly enough for a child, and even with a weight loss goal, that is not enough in this off season. So working with a registered dietitian, if you have weight loss goals, especially in the off season, is a good idea, because we can work with you to customize a plan, what to eat, where things can be cut, how to still feel full. In the off season, if you're pursuing weight loss, and even in general, this isn't a bad idea. You could increase your focus on colors on your plate, having more fruits and vegetables, and that could take the place of some of the complex carbs that you need to be eating now as you're training for the half or the full. So that's one of the first places I go with people. I try to have people have more color on their plate. This increases fiber, which is something that helps all of you feel full, and this can lower your calorie intake without making you feel too deprived. And also, I want people in the off season to aim for really gradual weight loss if that is your goal. This is because if you go too fast, you may risk losing muscle mass, and I don't think any of you here want that. So I typically recommend a half pound to a pound per week. There are, of course, exceptions to this, and this is why you may need to work one-on-one with a dietitian. If you're starting from a bit of a higher weight, it may be appropriate to do more like 2 or 3 pounds per week, but it really depends. And so for this question, I just tried to customize it to what people had asked me ahead of this presentation, just about like when to lose weight loss and how to balance it with their training. So I'm telling you not to focus on weight loss in your training cycle. And some of you are probably sitting there and being like, okay, that's great, but what if I do want to lose weight, or I have started to lose weight? That's fine. Sometimes just by being more intentional with your diet, you may lose weight even while training for a half or full marathon. I just don't want any of you to really pursue calorie restriction because it might backfire. But if you do things like consistent eating, preventing yourself from getting too hungry, having a meal or snack every 3 to 4 hours, having balanced plates, using the performance plates as your basis and inspiration, and maybe even breaking out of a rut, trying new foods. Most runners and people that I see in my practice as a dietitian have about the same 15 foods per week. And that's fine if you know what works for you. But trying new foods can increase your nutritional intake and make eating more satisfying and exciting. And by eating consistently, trying new foods, having balanced plates, there is a chance you could lose weight in your training cycle without really intentionally restricting your calories. This way of being mindful and consistently eating is recommended no matter what your goals are. So I just want to be clear. I'm not saying that some of you may not lose weight in a training cycle. I'm just saying I wouldn't recommend pursuing it really closely because it doesn't usually work out well when you're running a marathon. It's much better to do it intentionally during the off season. So again, another thing is moderation rather than deprivation. Your healthy choices should be the basis, but you don't need to deny yourself treats or less healthy choices this training cycle. I always tell people, try to have 85 to 90% of your plate be really highly nutritious choices, and the other, 10 to 15% can be fun food choices. So highly nutritious choices we've talked about a lot today: whole grains, calcium-rich foods, fruits, vegetables, lean proteins. Fun foods would be, a post-run donut, having soda, desserts, chips, I don't know, baking something. I guess that falls under desserts. Going out to eat. Maybe it's getting a burger or pizza. Pizza can be a really great performance food if you have it at home or you load veggies on it. But if you're getting, a lot of toppings on it, that may be more like a fun food. So just kind of do a gut check when you're thinking about your plates. If you do this, I can almost guarantee, unless there's underlying factors, which would need to be investigated, things like your iron levels, your sleep. If you eat this way, I can almost guarantee that you'll feel pretty solid this training cycle, as long as you're fueling your runs as well. Which is our next topic: what to eat the night before and prior to long runs. So anyone here, I'm trying to get a little participation while I have some water. What do you typically eat the night before or prior to a long run or a race? Like, what's your go-to?
Spaghetti.
What do you have? I missed that.
I like spaghetti or pasta.
Yeah, spaghetti or pasta. That's a really popular one. That's great. Anyone else?
Baked potato.
Baked potato. Yeah, great source of complex carbs.
Something with rice.
Something with rice. Yeah, like a protein. Anyone else? And it's okay to be unconventional. All of you might find this funny, and I'm not recommending this because this is high in fiber, but I frequently have black beans and rice the night before a race or long run, but that is a very high fiber choice that I would caution people who aren't used to fiber from having. But I usually do that or like some sort of homemade pizza with lower fiber vegetables. But yeah, so this can take some experimentation, which we'll talk about. So what to eat and drink the night before your long run? So you, especially if you have, say you have a big 20 miler this weekend, you really want to increase your carbohydrate consumption in the days before and especially the night before, but be careful with fiber. So most of you probably shouldn't have black beans unless your stomach has shown that you can handle that. I might be a little bit of an anomaly, but I've been doing this even since my college running days. Don't ask me why. What this means is some of you may need to focus on more refined carbohydrates versus whole grains in order to lower the fiber. That's totally okay. This might be white rice. This might be a white potato versus a sweet potato. This might be white bread instead of whole grain bread. When I'm having the black bean rice combo myself, I always make it with white rice, not a whole grain rice. I stay away from quinoa the night before. So we're all super different. So this is the time to start experimenting since we have more than a month until race day for any of the races that all of you are doing. The other thing to think about the night before is to stay hydrated with water. And if you're a heavy sweater or it's really hot or humid, you may want to consider what's called hyperhydration. So what is hyperhydration? Hyperhydration is consuming a sports drink that is high in sodium and also contains carbohydrates the night before and or the morning of a long run or race. Scratch and Tailwind are kind of the classic examples I can think of, but there's other ones out there. Like there's Levelin. I can anticipate some of you might be asking about Noon. If you're going the Noon route, you would need the Noon that comes in the canister, the endurance formula that actually has some carbohydrates as well. Their little tabs don't have carbohydrates in them. Scratch actually used to have this like hyperhydration, like really salty mix for people who are heavy sweaters, but I don't think they sell it anymore. And I know the taste wasn't super popular, but it was pretty helpful. So hyperhydration is something to also consider, but you may need to work more closely with your primary care provider or a dietitian to figure out if you even need to hyperhydrate. So now what about the morning of your long run or race? You want a high carbohydrate snack or meal 15 to 60 minutes before your long run. I gave a wide range because all of you have different stomachs and how quickly you can digest might vary and your time might vary. If you're a really busy mom also training for the marathon, you might not have 60 minutes. You might have to wake up, get the kids going, stuff something down your throat, and then get out the door and run. But that isn't an excuse. You still need to eat something. You want it to ideally have 50 grams or more of carbohydrates, but more is better. For your longest of runs, 100 grams of carbohydrate would honestly be great. So here's some ideas. A bagel with honey or jam, oatmeal with banana because banana is a lower fiber fruit. Nature's Bakery fig bars, that's one of my go-tos. A honey stinger waffle or an untapped waffle if you want a waffle that's vegan. a couple sheets of graham crackers. You can have applesauce, but you would need to have it with something else because that wouldn't be 50 grams of carbs. Next, you would want to have 1 to 2 cups of water or a sports drink about an hour before your run. I put an hour because if you do that right before your run, like 10 minutes, you're probably going to have to go to the bathroom during your run. And I'm sure many of you are planning your routes near bathrooms, but that's just something to keep in mind. So that's why I say to do it more like an hour before the run. So practice your race day sports nutrition and hydration. During your long run, there are so many things to consider. And this is, again, where working with a dietitian one-on-one may be beneficial, but I'm going to give you all some general guidance. So generally, you will need to intake 8 to 30 ounces of fluid per hour, but this varies widely on climate and your sweat rate. I've had athletes I've worked with that, only need around a cup, but I've had ones that 30 ounces of liquid per hour is not enough based on their sweat rate and their thirst. You may want to consider sweat testing if you want to really understand how much you're losing, how much you need to replace. Are you a salty sweater? Do you need like a really salty sports drink? Do you need a less salty sports drink? Should you use salt caps? So there's a lot of things to think about. But 8 to 30 ounces. And then 60 to 75 grams of carbohydrate per hour in the form of gels, chews, sports drinks. Some people use food like dates, so that falls in this category. And again, I have been able to get some athletes to be even higher than 75 grams of carbohydrate per hour, and that will only benefit you. But 60 is kind of the minimum starting point I like people to be at. So to do this, I recommend a gel or chew every 30 minutes. And I do minutes versus mileage because everyone's running pace varies so widely. So if you've heard, like every 3 miles, if you've been instructed that, that's fine. But I think going by minutes is a safer bet because if you're running 3 miles in 20 minutes versus running it in 40 minutes, that's going to really change your nutrition plan. And you're already going to be on your feet for much longer if you're a runner that your pace is, closer to the 40 minutes for 3 miles. So again, 30 minutes, I would take a gel or chew. I would look at the carbohydrates, see does it have, 25 or 30 grams. Take that every 30 minutes. If your sports drink also has carbohydrates, that does count toward the 60 to 75 grams of carbs. This is a bit of a math equation and it takes some trial and error. I would start experimenting now to find the products that work for you. If you're feeling really lost or overwhelmed or confused, this is a service I do with people. We go through how long your runs have been. If you have a sweat test, we might look at your sweat test results. We kind of map out when and how many gels or chews to take, how much fluids to carry. Do you have someone that can meet you with the fluids? Is there water stops when all of you are going to the big river team runs? There's lots of things to think about, but you want to start experimenting now before we get too close to race day so you feel really confident in your fueling plan. So that was a lot of information, as I know. Besides my own brain and schooling, I have used these 2 awesome books for reference. They're not really a great read just for the everyday person, but I wanted you all to know of them and know that I use them in reference. So Nancy Clark, and then Sports Nutrition, a handbook for professionals. So that was written for dietitians. And then my own learnings and experiences inform this presentation as well. And so now in the remaining time, I'm going to open up the floor for additional question and answer. All of you attending or watching the recording live actually get a sample week-long meal plan from me that shows what carbohydrate loading might look like. So the carbs increasingly get higher and higher until you approach the weekend race day. And it has all the macros in the meal plan. It has some recipes, even though some of the things in the meal plan are quite simple. And you all just get that by attending tonight. Before I open up the floor to questions, I wanted to highlight my contact information. So my email for nutrition is amanda@amandawagnernutrition.com. And for run coaching inquiries, you can reach out to amanda@bigriverrunning.com. My website is www.amandawagnernutrition.com. And if any of you like to be on social media like Instagram, my handle is fueling.veggie.athletes. You do not need to be plant-based to work with me. I work with all types of athletes. I am plant-based myself, and I do have a high number of plant-based athletes, but like right now I have all sorts of people on my roster. I'm going to stop my screen share so I can see the chat and everyone's faces, and we can use the remaining time to just talk about whatever else is you all want to ask me. Yeah, so did any other questions emerge? There's a lot of information.
There is one in the chat about intermittent fasting. While Amanda takes a look at that, obviously, thank you for taking the time to present tonight. I'd like to really double down on her recommendation of fueling based on time, not mileage, especially if you think about maybe you start to bonk and hit the wall in your marathon and your pace slows down drastically. Now your body's craving fuel, but you're taking it even less often because it's taking you longer to cover a fixed distance. So if you're running with like a Garmin or a lot of other watches, I have a timer set for every 30 minutes. It's one of the alerts in the settings. And so it chimes at me every 30 minutes and I know, hey, it's time to take a gel. So highly encourage you to do a time-based fueling plan.
Yeah, I love that idea of having your watch give you the reminders. That's brilliant, Mike. I actually haven't even thought of that. So thank you.
Yeah, I have it set a little bit differently, depending on what I'm doing and how long the race is. Some of the activity profiles, I have it at 40 minutes. Such as if I'm doing a half marathon, that's what I've settled on works for me. But when I get into it, like a marathon or an ultra marathon or longer things, it's every 30 minutes. It just beeps at me, and then I look at my watch and I know what the plan is. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah, that's a really great idea. I encourage all of you to consider that. And remember as well that if you're taking sports drinks with carbs and calories, that counts as well. So that can make it feel a little less overwhelming if your plan isn't that close to what we talked about now. But that's why I shared that with all of you now, because we're still a while away from October. But now I will start addressing the questions in the chat. So feel free to keep dropping them, or you can, come off camera, any of you, to ask them as well. So first is, can you do intermittent fasting before a long run? I may need some additional information because every intermittent fast is different, but my stand by this, and I would say no. I would not intermittently fast before a long run because then you're going into the run completely depleted. You wouldn't have eaten anything of substance. A lot of people do an intermittent fasting where they eat in a really narrow window. Like say they stop eating at, 6 or 7 p.m. If you haven't eaten since 6 or 7 p.m. on Friday night and your long run is at 7 a.m. the next morning, that is 12 hours that you're going without anything in your system. And we're running a really long time. We need at least 130 grams of carbs just for our brains to think each day. So you're going into your long run depleted and it's not going to feel very good. I just would not recommend that. It is a recipe for injury, for bonking, for GI issues. I would have a high carbohydrate snack before the long run to break the intermittent fast and then take your sports nutrition. Intermittent fasting is not generally a great idea for endurance athletes as a whole. But if you're going to do that, I would definitely do that in an off season and not leading up to a marathon. I know that that can be like a hard answer, but I don't want any of you to get injured and not be able to make it to the start of your race. So I like to keep it real and share what the science says around sports nutrition. The next question. Your thoughts on protein powders. Are they a good protein source? So with protein powders, I always ask people to, take a look at the label. Most protein powders are a good source of protein, and all of you have high protein needs compared to the regular population. The question would be better asked, do you need protein powder? Like, are you able to get the protein you need from your diet alone, or is protein powder recommended? And I would say that that depends on how good you are about eating a wide variety of protein-rich foods. I do find for my plant-based athletes, it is really hard to meet your goals because you have to eat 10 to 15% more protein than omnivores. So protein powder for plant-based people in particular really makes sense. For people in middle age, you may also want protein powder. Your needs are higher. After a long run or workout, you want to have 40 grams of protein as soon after as possible. That can be challenging unless you want to chow down on a chicken breast. So having a protein smoothie could really help out with that. So my thoughts are, it depends on your goals. It depends on what types of protein-rich foods you like. And it also depends on your level of competition. If any of you were going off to the Olympics earlier this summer in Paris, we would be looking at the label and making sure it was NSF for Sport certified. It doesn't have any banned substances. For most of us regular people, I would just have us look at the label and see if it has ingredients that sit well with your stomach. Sometimes protein powders can be hard on people's stomachs. They sometimes have like sugar alcohols or ingredients that may not be as ideal. So I would just check the label, but I think it's fine if any of you here like to use protein powder. It's totally fine. Great question, and great question about the intermittent fasting as well. Any other questions?
Does the NSF certification, does that actually check to make sure that it has what it says it has in it and not just banned substances?
Yeah, it does. NSF and Safe Sport Certified check for banned substances and truth in labeling. So what is in the label? What is on the label? Is it actually in the product? If you're someone that's important to, Consumer Labs is another great place to get that information as well. Yeah, so it's like trying to say what's in it is in it, because I don't know if any of you know this, but unlike the food system, which is regulated by our government, supplements aren't directly regulated. So people can like make a protein powder and put it on the market and say that it has 30 grams of protein made of pumpkin seeds and whey protein or whatever is in it. And it doesn't actually have to contain that. It's kind of not great. So we often want these additional certifications so we know what's in the product is actually in the product. So great question, Chris.
Are there NSF gels or gummies or anything like that?
Ooh, that is a great question. The top of my head, I'm not positive which ones are NSF for sport, but there are not many. But most gels and chews are regulated as a food product, not a supplement. So it should contain what it says it's going to contain. But some of them have gotten the additional certification. So chews and sports nutrition, like gels, are considered food typically and not a supplement. So
Yeah, I
that's
asked that because of the spring energy controversy that some of us probably heard about earlier this year. So I didn't know if there was something that could check those things or not.
yeah, like some gels are regulated as food products and some are regulated as supplements. The Spring Energy is a great example. It had like half the carbs that it said it did. And if any of you feel really affected by that, I actually have a blog post on my website that talks about that and gives some recommendations for other gels. And several of the gels that are recommended in the post should be available locally at Big River for you to purchase. I would stay away from Spring since we don't want any of you under fueling, even though it is quite tasty.
Yeah, we obviously encourage you and appreciate it when you shop local, whether that's with Big River or one of the other local outdoor providers. Different ones carry different nutrition products. The feed.com does have a whole lot of nutrition options. And for most of their products, they do show if they've got the NSF or the informed choice, which is I think a European counterpart to the labeling. Science and Sport is one of the brands that I've personally used that no one really locally carries in store, but that's has truth in labeling and banned substance free. And then Precision Fuels and hydration is also, I know, on that list. There's many, many others. It seems that more and more are getting some of these labels put on them, especially as the sport of ultra running is becoming more popular and more drug testing is taking place in the ultra running scene. I think more brands are starting to label it. The Goo Chocolate Outrage Energy Gel did have exactly what it said it had in it when they were tested in the Spring Energy controversy. And then Gnarly Nutrition, some of their products are certified, some of their other flavors aren't. And that I think is they just kind of went and certified their most regularly used ones, but definitely something that's worth looking for because you want to know what you're putting in your body. That's also true with things like collagen and creatine supplements and all of those sorts of things, is buy those from a reputable source if you're using them and make sure that they are what they say they are.
Yeah, all of that is so key, and it can be really confusing to navigate the labels. A lot of products will be like third party certified, but it won't have the results published. You'll contact the brand and they'll kind of evade the questions. That can be a red flag. So when you're looking at products, look for Informed Sports, NSF certified. If you're really confused, this is something that I frequently work with people as a dietitian. Like, we can go through supplements and try to find ones that fit your needs that have these additional certifications. Or some of them, if they can't afford the certification yet, the brand is willing to talk on the phone or via email and give you the information you need. So you don't necessarily, like, some of the brands are in the process of it now and you can have conversations with them and they'll be transparent. So that's something to think about too. But yeah, all of the things about what's in the product, is it actually in it, has been really interesting the last few months, like what has come to light.
I'd also caution people a little bit, just social media is great, online advertising is great, but don't always take Instagram influencer ads at face value. Maybe look at what are some pro athletes actually doing, what are they actually using. It doesn't mean that there aren't quality brands out there that aren't being used by pro athletes or things like that, but if there's some claim being made on the internet that, like, oh, this certain morning time routine practice is the greatest key to success, and then you look around, you can't find any evidence that any pro athlete in any sport is actually doing it, it's probably some farcical thing. So just do your due diligence on some of that. the quick life hack isn't always what it's made out to be. Consistency and diligence is often better.
Well, and even with the point you bring up, some of the athletes are sometimes paid by brands to promote specific products. So even with the pros, I caution everyone to be skeptical. Something that came to light, like an example I think of recently, is I've seen a lot of athletes taking those I don't know, like ketone IQ or something or other. And one of them is a pretty well-known ultra runner, Grayson Murphy. And we don't want to be fueling by ketones in our races. We want to have carbohydrates. So when I saw that she was affiliated, I felt concerned, but then I saw that she was taking it after her runs with a full meal that had carbohydrates and protein, and is linking on to the possibility that ketones may have a recovery benefit. I'm sharing this example to say, even because I really like Grayson, and I'm sure a lot of people here do as well. I'm really fond of a lot of the pro athletes, but I remember seeing that and being like, why are you partnering with the ketone brand? Dietitians don't like to see that. So I would just like ask you, like, are they getting money? How are they using it? And if you're confused, do additional research, ask someone, see. Sometimes I see people promoting greens powders, and I'm like, do you think they're actually having the greens powder, or do you think the greens powder is paying them money? Like, just be really skeptical about things on social media with pro and influencers alike. I see in the chat we have, oh, that's funny. You put ketones in the chat as well. I missed that. Can you elaborate a little what you mean, Laura? Like, what about ketones?
Okay, yeah. So like just like you said, when you went on to talk about pro athletes promoting them, I think another thing to think about is like, are they having the ketones like by themselves, or are they taking them with carbs before they go run? So you nailed it. You already talked about it.
Oh, well, perfect. We were on the same wavelength somehow then. I love it. Any other questions? I know we're technically we're a few minutes past the time, but I can offer a couple more minutes if anyone wants.
Well, Amanda, we appreciate your time and all the great information you shared this evening. This will be shared with the training team audience. We'll have those performance plates shared as well. And then Amanda's contact info is available, so don't hesitate to reach out to her if you have questions. She does provide a variety of nutrition counseling services as well as run coaching. And we wish you the best as you're training for your events this season. Amanda, did you have any parting words?
Parting words, I just wanted to point out for people, if anyone ends up interested in a dietitian, I take some insurances and then I offer private pay as well. I just know that that can be important. I'm licensed in Missouri, Illinois, and a handful of other states. And my parting words is just, as the presentation said, you need to fuel if you want to finish your race. So I hope that all of you feel pumped up about a fueling mindset as you enter the peak weeks of your races. I hope everyone has a good night.
Thank you very much.